We're now starting our roundtable called Creative Destruction in Science and Research. Our participants of the roundtable and I have agreed on the fact that the introduction of the participants I will do in Russian, and the following discussion will be held in Russian because all of our colleagues represent foreign schools or foreign institutions. We're all aware of the fact that English language is an international language, and for an international center that Moscow is striving to become, it is very important to know and understand and use this common language. Our today's discussion will be about three very important, to my opinion, spheres of constructive destruction in science and research. The first sphere of creative disruption is understanding of a science as a creator and of a future, with the examples from personal experiences of every one of our participants. And I hope that the case studies we'll hear about will teach us something new and will inspire us to do something new. The second sphere is the creation of technological chains of the future. It never happens that some discovery or invention only influence one point sphere. And the opinion of our participants on how do we form those consortiums that help us to disrupt that existing technological order and enter the future. This is what we're interested in. And the last but not the least will be about the social position of the scientist in the society generally, because we obviously represent totally different groups and types of societies here. And it's very interesting how the relation and the opinion about scientists influence the whole existence of science. And let me introduce the participants of our discussion. Mr. Richard Roberts, Chief Scientific Officer of New England Biolabs, Nobel Laureate in Chemistry of 1993. Mr. Edward Crawley, President and the founder of Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, Engineering Professor, Ford Engineering Professor, Aeronautics, Astronautics and Engineering Systems Professor. Hamid Reza, Amirinia, Assistant to Vice President of Iran for Science and Technology. Mr. Oleg Figovsky, member in of European Academy of Sciences, foreign member of RENAACS, Director of the Research and Development Department of International Nanotechnology Research Center, Polymate. And well, to start our roundtable, our discussion, I will give the floor to Mr. Figovsky, who will introduce us to the innovative systems of Israel, which is one of the models for the fast development of innovations and one of the examples of how innovations influence society and the whole development process in general. Well, generally, I would like to dwell more on Israeli experience, because the United States experience is so wide and it's so different from Russian one. I consider it's not really correct to do. On this slide, you can get the understanding of the financial support of the Israeli science. If we have a look at the support from the GDP, you'll find out that Israel occupies the first place among other countries in the list of the financial support. The same thing if we calculate the number of scientists that work in industrial sphere as well. You see here that Israel is #1 again. So this is the answer to the question, why is the contribution of Israel in world science is much higher than the contribution of any other countries? Of course, we can't really compete with the United States and Japan in generally, but if we take like per capita indications, we'll be #1. Next slide. I am the president of Israeli Association of the Inventors, and you see the information, the data on patents, and I can assure you that we occupy the first place among the number of patents. I will skip this because it's too long will be to just describe you everything, and I will just mention that Israel is the country that it's included in all international cooperation mechanisms. We often receive grants from other countries. The grants that we receive from the United States account for can be as high as up to $8 or $9 million. And we receive from Russia 5 times more grants than from Ukraine. And sometimes the figures that we receive from Ukraine are so small that we can't really afford anything. You see here what spheres of science and technology are more developed in our country, generally 4 of them. The following slide. The issue that I'm very interested in. I'm an expert of European Commission, and in Russia the requirements for technical grants are quite weird for me. The technical scientists are required to provide the citation index, but not Scopus nor Web Science do not count the web patent links, but according to the legislation, first you have to provide with your application the patent number, so it will be the primary information. As an example, I provided here the 4 spheres that I work at, and I provided the figures for my patent links in comparison with my citation index, and you see here how big the difference is. I was asked to tell you about main directions of our work. And I would like to briefly introduce you to the scientific approaches that we implement. I took 4 main approaches. First one is the one that you have to constantly think about. This is the realization of everything that the God created. The materials created originally by nature are now created by the computer. We have a 2D or 3D net that gives us an opportunity to create the materials. For example, if we talk about silk, we can not only take it from nature, but create it in a computer way. Porcelain, the same thing. Now the production of porcelain is all done basing on the nanotechnologies. Another thing that we did, we made a research of sunflower seeds, and we created the coating of the seed basing on the nanotechnologies that now helps us to increase the productivity, the harvest, up to 70%. It's all described in the American patent, but somewhere in the text of the patent it says that it works as a nano chip. And it says nano chip and the seed coating processing with its help. Another method that we also invented, and it's based on totally new technologies. The technology has been discovered in Belarus, and the very important prerequisite for that technology is that the worker should be really drunk while doing that. It turned out that there was an explosion that happened because one of the workers was drunk, and during that explosion, some of the particles transformed into some new fibers, which helped us to produce some new track membranes. Before that, we used the radiation of synchrophasotrons, and we depulverized the polymers. And it costed us a fortune. It was very dangerous for the environment. And now, using this new method of manufacturing of a track membrane helps us to manufacture them in a more cheap way without using the radiation or any other different types. Another method that we're using is the method of producing a hybrid polyhydrourethane network, which has a base of carbonated, epoxidized, unsaturated fatty acid triglycerides. Though, despite the fact that it's very successful, there is a certain danger. The manufacturing of this type of materials is very dangerous. There was an incident in India which led to the big amount of deaths of people working in the production. This new method gave us an opportunity to produce non-toxic materials. So it was the same polyhydrourethane, but without the toxical characteristics. And for today, we are already able to produce elastic polyhydrourethane. We are often asked, how do we implement? But we don't really implement anything. A year ago, I remember a wonderful company, Victoria's Secret, called us. It's actually their goal to find what they need. And in a couple of years, at all those clothes that our women are actually wearing will be written that it's made from polyhydrourethane. Now they are actually able to write it there because it's not toxic any longer. They came to us and they told us that they need the same material but without toxic characteristics. So you don't really need to implement anything. You just only have to answer the demands of the industry. I can't really predict everything, but I can only react to what is needed from me. Please, you can find here all the links to our websites where you can find all the technical documentations. Thank you for your attention.
Now I'm switching to English, and I want to ask our guests about their view to the influence of disruptive technologies to our life. What is the global view of the technology and scientific ideology leaders of from different countries. Please, Richard.
Well, the only thing I can really talk about that I know about relates to the biotechnology industry. So some of you may remember there was a time when there was no biotech, when the kinds of genetic modification of plants was not possible. See if I can get this so that you can hear it reasonably. And what happened with biotech is that President Nixon declared war on cancer and put so much money into research to study cancer, much more than was actually you could think of how to spend. And so people started to spend money on some blue sky ideas, things that you had no idea whether they were ever going to be useful or not useful. And out of that came the discovery of restriction enzymes, which is something that I personally was heavily involved in. And then people realized that you could use these to cut up DNA, to make new combinations of DNA, clone things, and out of that the biotech industry developed. And what happened was that there were a very small number of companies that provide the raw materials that people needed in order to do this. So this was a case where scientists in the lab needed enzymes in order to be able to practice this technology and do what they wanted to do. That then spawned several companies that were making these enzymes. And then people began to go further, and there were other things that they needed. And I think this was a very good example of how something completely disruptive, completely unexpected, led to improvements in society, led to great improvements in science, but also, unfortunately, has now led to various controversies. There's whole incidents of GMOs. Everybody in Europe is very worried about genetically modified organisms for political rather than for scientific reasons. But these things happen. As soon as you start to disrupt the existing paradigms for how to do things, then what happens is that you very quickly discover there are people who don't like the new paradigms, and so they find ways to go against them. But on the whole, I think this idea of trying to disrupt existing technology, existing ways of doing things, is really very good. The internet is a perfect example of how society has changed dramatically because of a new technology that came along.
Thank you very much, Professor Roberts. Professor Crawley.
Thank you, Alexander. I wanted to talk about a different type of disruption, which is one in which technology from one field is moved to another field. So I've spent my entire professional career working on spacecraft and space systems, mostly with NASA, large optical systems in space, Earth-observing spacecraft, human spaceflight. And this type of activity creates new ways of thinking, new algorithms, new methods, new materials. And I want to talk briefly about 3 cases where these technologies moved from something that had to do with space to something that had nothing to do with space. And these 3 cases are differentiated by the role of market and invention. So basically, these 2 things have to go together to make a successful technology-based product, right? There has to be some new science, and there has to be some new understanding of the market. And in fact, my mentor, Amar Bose, the fellow who started the Bose Corporation, said to me once, "I've never produced a product where the marketing difficulties were not as complex as the technical difficulties." So as technical entrepreneurs, as scientific entrepreneurs, we have to realize these 2 forces balance. So in one company, somebody who understood the market came to my laboratory and said, I'm looking for something that I can make into a product, and it appears that you have it. So in this case, I had invented a technology. My students had actually invented the technology, of course. And somebody who understood a market need systematically came through MIT looking for inventions and found one and made a connection. I would say this happens in more than 50% of successful companies that I've seen in my career at MIT, where I spent 40 years. The second case is where someone understands a technology and goes looking for a market. And this is actually the most common model of people like us, I would say, people who are basically technology inventors or scientific discoverers, and then find something and then say, now how could we use this? So this was a company that had some very mature, not myself, very mature people in it, who decided that the right thing to do, the technology, by the way, was a fast nonlinear optimization algorithm that we had invented to plan human spaceflight missions to Mars. So the question is, what else can this algorithm be used for that would be productive to society? Well, you can judge whether it's productive to society when I'll tell you the answer. But the point is that this company went through a very, very rigorous process of first thinking about 7 or so potential market applications, and then bringing it down to about 3 or 4 and doing more study, and then bringing it down to 2 and then doing more study. And on April 1st, 2008, we made the decision at the board of what market to put this product in. Now, I remember it's April 1st because, of course, in America that's called April Fool's Day, and you're not supposed to make decisions on April 1st. And I remembered it was 2008 because of the economic crisis that followed in the next few months. Because the 2 potential markets that we could have put this technology in were financial transfer management and online advertising placement. And on April 1st, we decided to put it into online advertisement management. If we had chosen the other one, by September the company would have been out of business because the economic downturn would have swept away all new startups in the field. So now you can decide whether this product has societal good, because if you go online to a website and a banner ad pops up in front of you, there's a 1 in 4 chance that this algorithm placed that ad in front of you. In other words, we have 25% of the business in this sector. The third case, so this was a case where the inventors sought a market. The first case was where the market sought an invention. Occasionally, I would say only in a small percent of cases, in the mind of one person or one small group of people, the market and the technology come together just sort of explosively. That you invent something and it's so obvious that what market and product that invention should go to, you just do it right away. So the point is that third case is rare. That rarely do one person or a small group of people, I think, have such insight into both the technology and the market and product that they're able to make that connection themselves without any other help. So when we look, as the program encourages us to do, to methodologies practiced to manage disruption, I think one of the important methodologies we have to manage is this connection of product or invention with market and opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Crawley. Please, Dr. Amirinia, what is your experience and your opinion about the disruptive technologies and their influence on the life?
Could I manage? Thank you very much. Thank you very much. in the name of God. Actually, we had faced by disruptive technologies since last century. And for managing disruptive technologies, we should have strong infrastructure in science and research. I would like to inform you about one of the experience in my country, Iran, one of the developing countries, and evolution of emerging technologies market in the context of technological innovation system and the case of Iran nanotechnology. And you know, in the end of last century, nanotechnology had been emerged in the world, and actually one of the important disruptive technologies at this time is nanotechnology. Actually, in my country, before Iranian Revolution, there was no enough activity in science. There was near zero. And after revolution, we have imposed war, and we could not have any special activity. After that, we focused on science and research, and especially in aspect of the human resource. And we are progressing exponentially at this time in science and technology. And actually, in the ranking of science generation as a total, Iran has 18 in the world. And in some area, biotechnology, nanotechnology, material, you could see it. And for example, in biotechnology, in the rank of science generation, Iran is at the 14th. But I would like to focus on nanotechnology at this time. And we have a special model. 10 years ago, we started nanotechnology in Iran. At that time, Iran was as a 56 in science generation. Now, Iran is as a 8 in the world. And at that time, we produced 8 papers per year. Now we have produced 10, 11 papers per day in nanotechnology sections. And Iran is one of the pioneer country in nanotechnology in region. And Iran is a member of standardizations of nanotechnology, and we have focused in some ideas. And at this time, recently in 2014, Iran could get 7th rank in the science generation in the world. And the share of Iran in science generation nanotechnology is more than 4.50. And the contribution of nanotechnology in my countries, actually contribution of Iran's nano article compared to total ISI article in my countries, in the world rank is Iran as a 2nd in the world. And actually, we have focused on nanotechnology 10 years ago, and we established Iran Nanotechnology Initiative Council under Vice Presidency for Science and Technology. And at this time, I would like to say the model of Iran for nanotechnology. The basic model is as a technological innovation systems, and we focused on institutions, technologies, some important factors and functions in the system boundary, and technological innovation system model is our main model for developing nanotechnology in Iran. If you are aware about the TIS dynamic, there is some special motor as an engine of developing science and technology in some areas. For example, science and technology motor entrepreneurial motor, system building motor, market motor. It is as a normal model, and Mr. Source from Europe, he introduced this model 2009. But in the case of Iran, we developed these systems to some important facts. The legitimation and promotion motor is one of the important. At this time in Iran, in the level of students, pupil in high school, we have many youth club for legitimation of nanotechnology among of young people, and we have very important plan for legitimation. And after that, we focus on science and infrastructure, developing motor and entrepreneurial motor and market motor. And we focused on some important function as a external factor for getting more achievements in nanotechnology. And actually, at this time, I would like to ask you to pay attention. One of the important statistics about the Iran nanotechnology, we have more than 20,000 scientists in nanotechnology in Iran, more than 2,600 faculty members, more than 15 universities running PhD program, more than 34 universities running MSc program, and you could find some other facts as well. And actually, you know, when you would like to face by disruptive technologies, you should have infrastructure, especially in human resource. Unfortunately, we could prepare many items, especially human resources. And we focused on actually knowledge-based companies as well, and more than 100 startup companies are working in Iran, and more than 140 manufacturing companies that are working in Iran. And at this time, we have more than 260 nano products in the market. And you could find in this picture some of that. For example, one of that is STM, scanning and tunneling microscopy, for taking picture in nanometer. Just 6 countries in the world could design and manufacture STM, and Iran is one of that. And we've focused on equipment as well. We could design and manufacture nano products and nano equipments. You know, one of the important infrastructure for managing disruptive technologies is equipment. Because of the sanction, we should focus on our internal capacity in my countries, and because of that, we have many achievements in high-tech equipments as well. And I would like to say one of the important area, nano by category. At this time, you could find it, the difference activity in health area, agriculture, and other things. From 2006 to 2011, there are many changing, because when you enter and diffuse nanotechnology in the market, you could find a very important changing in the quality and market. One of this important area is health and pharmaceutical industry. And we focused on this important area, and we could produce anti-cancer medicine based on nano. And the nanodoxisome is one of the important drug in market as an anti-cancer medicine. This medicine was in market for some patients as an anti-cancers. And when new drugs with nano-based imported medicine and nanodoxisome came to market, the price was $40 per vial, and after entering the new drugs based on nano, it was $700 per vial. And because of that, it was as a problem for Iranian patients to purchase it. Because of that, we focus on it, and we could manufacture in Iran, and now the internal price in my country is about $80. And it is very important, as you could see in the right hand, as a growth and time when current medicine, when you enter nanotechnology, as for example nanodrug delivery, there is a disruptive events for that market, and we should manage some aspects of human resource, equipments, and one of the important points, science and technology policy. You need policy for facing disruptive innovation and disruptive technologies to follow it, because if you don't have this type of activity as a human resource, equipments, plan, science and technology policy, you could not get enough achievements for your country, and the distance between your country and your system will be more than before, and you could not catch up it in near future. And because of that, in Iran, we focus on science and research, especially in human resource and equipment, for managing disruptive technologies, not only in nanotechnology, but also in biotechnology as well. For example, in biotechnology at this time in Iran, we have produced more than 20 expensive drugs. Some of them is 1 gram is about $2 million. One item we could export to Russia, one item $20 million, 100 kilograms. And we are moving in Iran based on science and technology activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for presentation of systematic approach of Iran to nanotechnologies. I have the question to our speakers. Please give us one bright example of the technology from your experience which opens a new niche, new window on the market, in the life, or absolutely change the approach to the technology chains. Please, Professor Richard.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, probably outside of direct biotech, I would say the internet is the thing that has really changed my life and the life of almost everybody on this earth at the moment. I remember a time when the ARPANET was sort of state of the art for getting around, and all of a sudden you could communicate with people that it was not possible to communicate with before. You could run computer programs elsewhere, and you could imagine writing computer programs to do things that previously had not seemed possible, because you had access to computers that were not necessarily right in front of you on your desk. I was heavily involved in doing that when DNA sequencing first got going. And so at the time, there was no one who had written programs to do this. It was difficult to persuade people to do it, and so I learned to program so that I could write my own programs. Of course, the downside of that was that I discovered I loved programming so much that it was in danger of consuming my entire life, and I actually had to stop and hire somebody else to do it. This happened in 1 week. I discovered that I'd been debugging a program and sort of looked at the clock and found out it was 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'd worked all night and not even realized it. I tend to have a bit of an obsessive personality. But I mean, this has changed everybody's life in ways that are almost unimaginable even 20 years ago. So I would say this is probably the thing that has had the greatest impact. And of course now it's manifest in many different kinds of areas. Smartphones. You know, smartphones are having an effect, aside from the fact that everybody is looking at them all the time. But if you go to Africa, they have no grid in Africa, but everybody has a smartphone. There are countries in Africa you can go to where the population, 95% of the population has a smartphone. Don't have constant electricity, they don't have good water, but they have a smartphone. So this is, I think, something that has been so disruptive. And of course one has to worry about whether the good and the bad really weigh. At the moment, I think the good greatly outweighs the bad, but we are in danger at the moment of the bad coming along and taking over. I think it's something we have to be rather careful about.
Thank you very much. Professor Figovsky.
Так как я специалист в области...
As I'm a specialist in the field of new materials, I would like to tell you how do we solve a problem much easier. At present, the composite materials like coal fiber and coal fiber have different characteristics. They can stand heat up to 140 degrees, for example. If we switch to very expensive and very complex technologies, they can survive up to 500 degrees. So we got the goal, using the same technologies, create the composite material that will support up to more than 100 degrees temperature. It was impossible to do with the existing polymers, and we switched to another technologies that consisted in using liquid glass. We've been using already liquid glass material, but cation has always, like natrium, calcium, has always been there, but we never actually thought that there are some organic cations. And when we created the liquid glass on a base of organic cations, as a result, we created the materials with that could stand the heat more than 100,000 degrees. So now we have those materials that are have totally different characteristics. But how do we get there? We had a different look on the very old and the very, familiar materials, that liquid glass. We just had to, think outside of the box. We just had to find another way to use this very old material, and we found these wonderful discoveries. Thank you.
A lot of examples, especially from interdisciplinary research.
Well, I'm somewhat intimidated giving this example sitting next to a Nobel laureate in physiology or medicine, but I will try. I think that there's a convergence that will occur in the next 10 or 20 years between the identification of biomarkers in human physiology and our ability to use mixed sensor systems, mixed measurement systems to identify relatively small presence of those biomarkers. You know, imagine the video that you see on TV this week of people coming out of West Africa who are threatened with carrying Ebola, right? So they arrive at the airport in London or Paris, and the measurement technique that's used to determine whether they have Ebola is a temperature gauge, you know, which has to be, well, for first screening might be enough, but has to be considered a very primitive measurement of whether Ebola is being carried by this person. So why is it that we haven't yet identified, with all the work that's been done on this very, very virile disease, why haven't we identified an easily identifiable biomarker that could be the presence of which could be detected in a very small blood sample or other bodily fluid? So it seems that year by year we discover more of these biomarkers for various diseases of various types, and what we need to do is build a concentrated effort to a set of sensor systems so that in a simple diagnostic medium, in the emergency room, in the hospital, even in the airport, that the presence of a wide variety of symptoms could be easily detected. I think it would have a very significant impact on diagnostic medicine. Was that okay?
I could reply. Would you like me to?
Sure.
So, you know, the big problem with viruses is that they change all the time. And so there is no single biomarker that you can say is going to detect all versions of Ebola or all versions of SARS. But what we can do these days is actually to develop diagnostics very rapidly if we choose to do so. I mean, the single major problem with Ebola is that the people who are ultimately stand a risk of it being truly disruptive have not spent very much money and have not put very much effort into trying to control it while it's still in West Africa. Okay, we just didn't spend very much money. And I think it's rather interesting that the group that did the best job with Ebola is Médecins Sans Frontières, right? Here's a non-governmental organization. They were the absolute best on the ground, and they rely upon voluntary contributions. I don't understand why governments do not support groups like that really are controlling and looking after and helping save the world from some really major problems. So we can develop biomarkers very quickly, but they have to be specific for the thing that's happening. And biology, the wonderful thing about biology, it keeps changing. Okay, it is not constant.
And they have to be widely distributed in an easily usable manner.
Right.
I probably made an error by choosing a virus as the example because, of course, Professor, you're right about the state of change. But
thank you, Ed. Dr. Amirinia, you told a lot about the number of publications and dramatically increased the number of publications of Iranian scientists in nanotechnologies. What about patents? What about the intellectual property and opportunities to transfer it to the real life? It was a good example with pharmaceuticals. Do you have any examples for industry?
Actually, we focused on science generation, and recently in last decade, we have focused on patent as well. In the patents, at this time, we are not in the good position because we should change the mind of academic staff, because the academic staff would like to prepare paper and announce. In the patents, they should keep it in the shelf, and after getting some result to announce for patent, USA patent. In the nanotechnology, in the rank of patent, Iran is about 25 in the world. but we have focused on it, and we are increasing the activity in this area. And in the case of industry, fortunately, we could diffuse nanotechnology in some industries. For example, for producing filter for power plant. At this time, in the level of industry size, we could produce nanofilter in Iran. In nano drug delivery is in the line at this time. And in the near future, we will have another product in market, and this year we are going to start a 10-year plan for nanotechnology area in Iran, and we would like to be as one of the 10 countries in the world as an economic of nano economy in the world. And it is right you mentioned about the importance of industry, and recently we focus on it, and fortunately we have some good example of it, but we need more activity in industry as well.
Thank you very much. You touch very pain problem for Russia concerning the thinking of scientists, style of thinking. Where is the compromise between scientific reputation in publications in Hirsch Index and the industrial applications of your results? I think each scientist make decisions themselves. And Professor Roberts, how you find the compromise?
Well, I have to start off by saying almost every statistic I've ever seen I don't believe. I do not think you can measure productivity by actually just citing citation numbers or anything like that. If you want to judge whether something is good, you actually have to read it and work out whether it's any good or not. The academic system, the academic systems that judge people according to the number of papers they've got and these artificial indices, I think do not do academics any great shakes. They don't help to decide who is good and who is not. Many of the people who do the very best work publish very few papers. And in fact, if you look at the truly disruptive things that happen coming out of academy, usually there's one paper, and it doesn't get cited for many years because people don't believe it, or it's so disruptive people don't want to get involved in it. So I think we have to get away from this system of judging scientists on the basis of the number of citations. Similarly, patents do not always tell you what you would like to know. One good patent can do wonders. 100 patents can be absolutely useless. And many universities in particular spend so much money on filing patents, on technology transfer, and what they end up being good at is transferring paper and rather poor at transferring technology. At least that's been my experience. And so I think you have to be a little bit careful about this. Not everything that you do warrants IP protection. There is actually nothing better than being first to market. When we started selling restriction enzymes, we patented nothing. And we only started patenting because a couple of other companies decided that they had to patent things. And we then filed all the patents we possibly could, and they went out of business. Patents don't always help you. If you look at the computer industry, things are now moving so quickly that patents are essentially useless. They don't help you. If you look at companies like Coca-Cola, they keep their formula as a trade secret. There are many ways of protecting what you're doing, but on the whole, I think getting your materials, whatever it is, to market first is really very important. Only in a case where you cannot raise the necessary capital to get the stuff to market do you really need intellectual property protection. The patent system as it's practiced in the US at the moment is a very flawed vehicle. In fact, the patents were originally decided, or they were intended, that you would get protection for 20 years, 17 years, whatever, and then everybody would know how to do it. Now lawyers write patents in such a way that even after the patent is granted, you can't work out what was actually done, and you can't get the material. You don't have access to the materials. So we have to do something about this. I think the US and Europe would be a good place to start because in principle their patent systems are quite robust. But I think one has to be rather careful not to think that because you've got a patent, you're going to be able to control some industry.
Thank you very much. Professor Crawley, do you have specific answer or you?
I think the answer to the question, if I remember the question, on sort of pure scientific output and input, I think there's two ways I answer this question. One is to quote, I think, a very influential piece of work by a fellow named Stokes at the Brookings Institute called Pasteur's Quadrant, where he made the observation that research does not lie along a single axis from fundamental to applied, but in fact is in a two-dimensional space, more or less fundamental and more or less developed with a consideration of use. And that I believe that the good scholars, and Pasteur is the archetype, that good scholars do some amount of real curiosity-driven thing, real blue sky thing, research, but as soon as it starts to bear some fruit, some understanding, they quickly start thinking about how this might be applied, at least in what direction it needs to move in order to have some impact on use. For a number of years, I ran the joint institute between Cambridge University and MIT, and we had a big program in quantum. This is already 10 years ago. And the quantum guys were mostly physicists, and they mostly talked about very fundamental things. And I challenged them one year in their budget discussion, how about if you come back next year with at least some ideas about how the research you're doing might actually influence how we educate students or how we build things. And much to their surprise, they were successful at doing this. And one of the things they did is they invented a new course at MIT where one began to understand, began to teach students more about the synthesis, more about the design of quantum mechanical devices, for example. So one way you solve this is you try to encourage scholars to act like Pasteur, to say it simply. The other way to do it, which is something you can do at a new university like the one that we now have in Moscow, Skoltech, is you can actually try to create a culture of a new company, a culture of a new university, or how to slowly migrate the culture of an existing place so that people value these things. Because a lot of what people do depends on their values, right? It's not their, I completely agree with Richard, it's not counting citations, it's creating a culture, creating a vision of a place as some place that should both be scientific and be practical, if you will.
I'm agree with value estimation, but the problem in motivation, seriously, how to motivate scientists to think about application. It's not only concerning values.
Yeah, it's. I think the most effective demonstrated way of it is to put in scientific teams people who understand potential applications, or at least bring them into contact, so that they can see. Scientists want their science to have impact, right? And I think the biggest limitation is they don't know how to do it. So if you can build communities like the KICS in the European research program, the Knowledge and Innovation Centers, if you can build these communities where there are both innovators and scientists, I think you have a better chance.
Thank you very much. And yeah, obviously.
So one way in which you can motivate scientists is not by paying them huge amounts of money, but by making sure that they have lots of money for research. And so I can tell you, when I first got started with restriction enzymes, I wanted to make a company at Cold Spring Harbor Lab with the idea that we could make these reagents available to the rest of the research community, and the profits could go back to Cold Spring Harbor Lab to pay for research. Okay? Jim Watson didn't think this was a good idea. First, he didn't think you could make money like it, plus he thought it was rather disgusting to be associated with a company at the time. And I found someone else who had the same idea, and so the company that I work for, we use the profits from the company not so that the founder can have 100 houses around the world and drive around in aeroplanes and so on. It is to support research. And so the profits come back and pay for research. And I think this is a very good way to actually motivate scientists to get involved in things. Most scientists, they don't do it for the money. And if you can find alternative ways of using the profits, this can be a big, powerful motivation for them.
Thank you. It's a very positive answer. I think it could work, really. And it worked today in US, in Great Britain. Unfortunately, it is difficult to find the success stories in Russia with reinvestments of the money to the research, but we try to do it, and I hope in near future we will have these success stories. I want to ask our leaders about how you're thinking about future technologies. Professor Figovsky told that it is somebody from the market come and ask, but on the market people usually don't think about disruptive technologies. They usually think about improvements of their technologies and optimization of their technologies. And what is interesting, who are the partners for you when you're thinking about the technologies not for tomorrow, for the day after tomorrow, whom you can invite and who need for you, how they create this system which will be from one side comfortable for the researchers and from another side effective in innovations. Professor Figovsky.
Значит, я думаю, что на этот вопрос
I think there is a really simple answer on this question. Let's analyze the content of Science America magazine. This magazine is not for scientists. This magazine is for business community. There are many businessmen who are interested in innovation. There are not many of them, but it's enough to find people who are willing to invest in innovation. Of course, not the expense of governmental funding. People may be simply curious about the creative disruption. I was in charge of a major American firm, the R&D department of this company, and I found out that we can raise the value of shares of the company just by introducing creative disruption. I was working for this company, and they managed at that time to raise money just through technologies that could be promising in future. They didn't bring any results at that time. The results were just promising, but the price of the share went up rapidly. That's the example from my experience.
Who is the partners for you?
Well, Okay. So we actually don't have any partners because we're a private company. And one of the problems is if you're a public company, you cannot set the guidelines. You're responsible to your shareholders. And your shareholders are typically holding your shares not in order to promote innovation, but to make money. They have no interest in the science. They have no interest in whether you're going to do something disruptive. They just want you to make money.
No,
that's why I like the idea of doing it privately whenever you can, and not going to the venture capitalists who are only interested in getting huge amounts of money out of things.
Principally, I understand, but the question was about who is your intellectual partner when you make the prognosis of the technologies which could be disruptive.
Well, I think in our case, we typically interact with academic researchers because we do basic research. So one of the big programs that we have is concerned with filariasis. We're trying to find cures for filariasis. This is something that we do for strictly humanitarian reasons. We don't expect ever to make any money out of it. We interact with a lot of people. We have targets that we have found, and we're trying to get drug companies interested in working with us. But, you know, filariasis is a disease of the third world. Drug companies don't want to invest in that. They have little interest in that. So that becomes a problem.
Professor Crawley.
So I'll speak to the point about forecasting technology, which perhaps is a little different than forecasting scientific output. And there's very good scholarship in the history of science on this topic, which is very discouraging. It essentially concludes that we can't predict technological future. Let me give you two pieces of concrete evidence. In 1936, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the President of the United States, convened a group of experts from around the nation to forecast the technologies that would be important in the coming war. Because even by 1936, it was obvious that the world was moving towards war. They forecast bigger battleships, thicker armor, you know, and they completely missed the jet engine, the atomic bomb, and radar, right? Which are arguably three of the great technological transformations that occurred in that era. And along with missing the jet engine, of course, they missed supersonic flight. In the Chicago exhibition of 1898, the people organizing the exhibit commissioned a wonderful set of essays about what the world would be like in 100 years, both scientifically, technologically, and socially. And 100 years after that, in 1998, someone wrote a book where they took all those essays and then they analyzed them. And it was a very interesting pattern that the people writing the essays 100 years ago had completely overestimated social progress. They figured that the world would be a safe place, that people would be equal, that there would be justice. You know, it was sort of a view of utopia. And they had completely underpredicted the technology. I mean, they had basically missed all of the inventions of the 20th century, right? So what the lesson is that the course of technology is in fact very complex and almost impossible to predict. And it's only when somebody makes a discovery, a scientific discovery or some sort of technological progress, that people then begin to understand what influence that may have. But to predict what those inventions and those discoveries are going to be is almost impossible.
Yes, but I don't know, the panel should have had Isaac Asimov on it, because he did pretty well.
Science fiction writers do the best job, that's right.
Yes, that's right, but you create the future and disruptive technologies yourself, so you're thinking about that. So I believe that you don't do it alone. You do it with your colleagues, with your partners, with entrepreneurs. Sometimes the people tell, okay, I did it alone, but okay, what was the system which allowed him to do it? And what is better for creation disruptive technologies? To organize strong groups and get help from the society, or concentrate on the private research and determine the focuses yourself. What is the way for the country like Iran, please?
And actually, your system should be ready for everything. For example, at this time, we have faced by cognitive science. In near future, world will have been affected. The product of cognitive science. You could get control the gadget, but by your brain. In near future, normal products would be in the market. At this time, in some area, for example, health and health equipment, there is some equipments based on cognitive science. And actually, it is very important to prepare yourself and to increase your capability in all aspects of area. Human resource, some important activity in your research centers. You need some national research centers to think about that. As you mentioned, for example, at this time, the industry, the markets, they would like to improve current technologies. They don't think about the future and the day after tomorrow. You should support national research centers. For example, in Europe, there is the Fraunhofer, Max Planck, and other instances. In some countries, like my countries, we are going to establish new national research centers for thinking about the futures. And it is very important to spread and encourage all sections of people, not only in the level of scientists. You should encourage the children when they will be in the schools to think about the future, because you need human resource, and you should work and you should think for next decade. At this time, you should train your human resource from high school, in the university, in research centers, and to encourage them to think about the future and especially spread prosperity and welfare among their nations. And it is very important, and I should say in the one statement, you should prepare systematically.
Thank you very much. I want to tell many thanks to all our speakers. They look on different models of creative disruption technologies. And I think the main idea was presented by our Professor Roberts. This is very important for the development in future for us. The motivation to implement the technologies to the market is the interest to go deeper to the nature, to the research. And it will help for good relationship of entrepreneurs and researchers in future. Thank you very much.